Thank you. And thank you also for that introduction. It was, even my daughters didn't know all that stuff. Anyway, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the courtesy of your invitation and for the compliment of your attention. Thank you particularly to Stephen, who has contributed so much to the improvement of criminal justice over the years, both in his academic work and in his direct work on a number of government bodies. And a personal thanks also from me for his contributions of enormous value to the HMIC Advisory Board over the years. Now, I hope many of you have seen some of the work of the Inspectorate of Constabulary before now, but I'd like to take some time with you this evening to talk in two parts. The first is to say something about what HMIC does and to provide a few examples of where we really have made a difference, or we believe we have. And then I'd like, in the second part, to discuss some of the greatest issues which face policing today. And I hope that'll be the basis for some questions at the end. I'll talk for about 30 minutes. My estimates in this respect aren't always reliable, and that will give us some time, and the balance of the time we have to talk more generally and deal with your questions. Now, the Inspectorate of Constabulary was established in 1856, so we're in our 159th year, and it was established shortly after the establishment of the police service in England and Wales. It began with the Metropolitan Police in 1829, and then under the County and Borough Police Acts 1856, there were other police forces established. And it was recognized very early on that if policing is as important as it is, and it spends the money that it does, and it's £13 billion a year now, then money should also be spent, public money should also be spent on the inspection of the police to ensure its efficiency and its effectiveness. And that's what we do. Our statutory remit today, under the Police Act 1996, is exactly the same as the principal statutory remit that the Inspectors of Constabulary were given in 1856. Now, it has to be remembered that HMIC is an inspectorate and it's not a regulator. And I know the difference between the two because I was a regulator, as Stephen has expressed. And our authority and our capacity to be a catalyst for improvement comes from the quality of our work and from the power of our voice. Now, regulators and inspectorates are very different. Regulators have hard power. Regulators have the power of intervention, direction, and enforcement. They can compel people to do things or to stop doing things or to do them differently, and they can impose sanctions, sometimes financial penalties, if people disobey their instructions. Inspectorates do not do that. They cannot do that. They inspect and they report. If we were to be regulators of the police, and we are not, and I believe we never should be, then we would be the Chief Constables of England and Wales, because we would have the power to override the judgment of a Chief Constable, and that would be a violation of the very precious operational independence of the police. However, it may be soft power, but it doesn't mean to say it's weak power, because it would be a very extraordinary, you may say foolhardy, reckless, brave Chief Constable, who was without valid reason to disregard the recommendations of an HMIC report. Others hold the chiefs to account. We now have the new model of local accountability in police and crime commissioners, established under the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. We had police authorities before then. In London, it's a wee bit different. And those are the people who have the power to hold the police to account. And the Home Secretary retains reserve powers. But none of those powers in the hands of the Home Secretary or in the hands of the Police and Crime Commissioner is to direct and to intervene in the way that a regulator would, for the reason I gave earlier, the operational independence of the police. Police and Crime Commissioners have a lot of power. They can set the overall policing priorities. They do set the budget for the police, and they can hire and fire the chief constable on valid grounds. And of course, they can make a decision not to reappoint a chief constable. And that may be the greater power than the power to dismiss. But nevertheless, we have the power of our voice, and it's a voice that must be heard. And we now speak directly to the public in terms that ordinary people can understand. It is important that that voice is heard, and that it is heard in the way that I've described. The Inspectorate of Constabulary wasn't always doing that. There was a time when the Inspectorate of Constabulary was a bit like the House of Lords for cops. If you were a very senior, large, influential chief constable, then when you came to retire, you might be appointed as one of Her Majesty's Inspectors of Constabulary, and one of you would be the chief. And it was also seen as the police talking to the police. Well, it's a very different story now. The complexion of the appearance, the reality of the composition of the Inspectorate of Constabulary is completely different. We now have, for the very first time, a majority of the inspectors of constabulary, there are 5 of us, who are not people who have served as chief police officers, have never served as police officers at all. Steve Otter is the former Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset, and Michael Cunningham is the former Chief Constable of Staffordshire. But the other 2 inspectors of constabulary, Zoe Billingham was a very senior civil servant in the Audit Commission and the Cabinet Office, and Drew Sharpling was Chief Crown Prosecutor for London. I am the first Chief Inspector of Constabulary who has never served in the police. And the reaction to the news of my nomination and appointment was not a universal welcome from the police service. In fact, I was told that the Home Secretary received 20,000 letters of objection to my appointment. The Home Secretary is not a lady to be deterred by that, because there were about 59 million, etc., who didn't write to her saying it was a bad thing. Anyway, the important thing, though, is that we are talking to the public in terms that they can understand, and that we are reporting honestly and fully on the efficiency and effectiveness of the police. And by publishing accessible information on the performance of the police, then we provide the public and the elected representatives and the police with information which they need to make the judgments that they make. The police in order to improve, their elected representatives in order properly to hold them to account, and the public so that they can make decisions as to whether their elected representatives are doing what Parliament has provided for them to do, which is to hold the police to account. And it enables them to act. So our light is shone brightly on inefficiency and poor practice in the police service where we find it, and it is also used openly to commend the best policing practices for others to follow. And let me just stress this, because this was said to me by a very senior chief constable quite recently, which I thought was unsustainable. We think that now the police service is there to criticize and only criticize the police. That is absolutely not right, and I was both surprised he said it and also glad he said it. I'm glad he said it because it brought it out and it enables us to deal with that criticism. Our purpose is to get the police to improve. We're all about improving policing. Chief constables are there to improve policing. Police and crime commissioners are there for improvement. The College of Policing is established in order to establish best practice and to improve policing. Everyone's here to improve policing. We're all pointing in the same direction. We have the same objective, but we have different toolkits given to us by Parliament in order to achieve that objective. And as I've said, the principal beneficiaries of the work of HMIC must be and will continue to be the public, because it is for their protection that the police exist. The highest duty of the state is to keep people safe. And therefore, the noble profession of policing is extremely important. And we saw in the August riots in London and other cities just what happens when policing cannot cope, at least for the first while, and how the thin veneer of civilization soon comes off, and the damage and destruction that can be done. And so the work and the recommendations of HMIC are directed at ensuring that the efficiency and effectiveness of the police can be as great as it can be made to be, including the infrastructure around and supporting the frontline officers, the constables who are out there day by day, making decisions, usually unsupervised, on their own initiative, using a power that is not delegated to them but comes from their crown appointment status. And they need to be supported because the results which they need to attain are the protection of the public. Now, HMIC operates independently of everyone. We operate independently, of course, from the police, from government ministers, from police and crime commissioners, from everyone. No one can in any way direct or control the contents of an HMIC report. And if anyone were to try to, then that attempt would fail and it would be very short-lived. Now, that independence is conferred by Parliament, not by ministers, not by at the discretion of anyone else. And it is precious, and it is essential, and it will never be compromised. It allows the public to know, and it allows the public to trust. Our statutory remit contains no political criteria, and our objectivity require no less than that. We will continue to fulfill those statutory obligations without either overreaching our jurisdiction or allowing irrelevant considerations, and political considerations would be irrelevant ones, to intrude in what we do. Our allegiance is to the law and to the public, and we have no other allegiance. Now, our strong sense of independence doesn't mean to say that we operate in isolation. We work very closely with other bodies in the criminal justice system, such as the Independent Police Complaints Commission and the College of Policing, and we have concordats with them. And that's a commitment by all of the three organizations, the IPCC, the College, and HMIC, to consult regularly with one another, to share information and analysis, and to ensure that our data collection and our inspection activities are themselves conducted efficiently and effectively. We're also in the process of completing a concordat with other criminal justice agencies and inspectorates, and those concerned with other aspects of the causes of crime or the consequences of crime, including the Care Quality Commission and Ofsted. And the aim of the concordats is to establish overriding principles so that we target the right things and we operate as well as we can. And part of that is to ensure that there is a greater understanding on the demands placed on the entities which we jointly inspect. And I'll come back to demand in a bit. Now, that's the background to our work. I want to talk now for a little bit about some of HMIC's work in the last year or two to deal with just a couple of examples where our inspections and reports have brought about real changes. And then I'll talk about how we're developing our approach to inspection and our work. Last year, we published our findings from an inspection of all 43 police forces in England and Wales, examining the effectiveness of the police's approach to domestic abuse. Now, it is profoundly regrettable that this is a crime and a phenomenon which is far too prevalent in society today. It has been for many, 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 many generations, but it's not going away. The latest statistics from the Crime Survey of England and Wales show that in the last year, 8.5% of women and 4.5% of men experienced domestic abuse in the last year. That's around one woman every 30 seconds and one man every minute. And every month, 7 of these women and 2 of these men will be killed by their current or former partners. So in the inspection, we went out and we spoke face-to-face with a number of victims, 70 victims of domestic abuse. We surveyed over 500 victims online and 200 professionals who are working with victims of domestic abuse. And we came to understand at first hand the difference it makes to victims when they are dealt with by competent and caring officers, and when they are dealt with by officers and others with judgmental attitudes, those who don't take victims seriously, or those who just don't do their job properly. Some of the findings were a matter of very serious concern. For example, we reviewed 600 files of actual bodily harm in domestic abuse cases and found that in only half of those cases were photographs taken of the injuries sustained by the victim. And there was only evidence of a risk assessment being supervised in half of those cases as well. We made many other findings, and the Home Secretary was sufficiently concerned, appalled by the scale of these failures exposed, that on our recommendation, she established a national oversight group which will see that the recommendations in the domestic abuse report are implemented, and there will be quarterly updates published to demonstrate progress. We recommended that the National Oversight Group should be chaired by a senior figure, and the Home Secretary herself has taken the chair of it. Now, what happens as a result of that report? Well, at force level, we've already seen some really good improvements by the police service. For example, Merseyside Police has now trained 1,500 frontline officers and staff in investigation skills in domestic abuse cases to improve initial evidence collection. And during our re-inspection of Greater Manchester Police, we found a significant emphasis on the supervision of handling of domestic abuse cases with dip sampling of crime reports and testing by specialist units to ensure that domestic abuse cases are being dealt with properly. That is the reaction of the police service, and our program of all-force inspections, which I'll describe a little later, will ensure that we are monitoring progress on the implementation of those recommendations. Now, let me give you another quite different example. It's a topic which is close to Stephen Shute's heart. Its title may not necessarily get the blood racing, but it's pretty important stuff. And it is on the integrity of crime statistics, crime data integrity. Over 7 months last year, we carried out the most extensive, the biggest inspection and most expensive inspection that HMIC has ever done. And it examined how each police force applies the rules for crime recording, which are laid down by the Home Office. We also assessed how the police's culture and behaviours affect crime recording, how victims of crime are being served by those crime recording practices, and how the police use out-of-court solutions such as cautions when dealing with offenders. Now, as I've said, this is the most extensive study of its kind. And why does it matter? Why does it matter? This is just numbers and statistics. What matters, surely, is whether the police catch criminals. Well, yeah, that matters. Of course it matters. The primary purpose of the police, let's remember, is the prevention of crime. But both in prevention activity and also in chasing criminals and catching them, bringing them to justice, the police need quality information. And they need to know where and what types of crime are taking place so that they can make efficient and effective decisions on the deployment of their resources. If crime recording is poor, then they are partially blind. What's more, victims of crime, crimes that are not recorded or not properly recorded, will not receive justice, and nor will the communities, because let's remember, we have in this country a system of public justice. Justice is not there at the hands of or for the primary purpose of an individual victim. It is there so as to ensure that the peace is kept and that criminals are apprehended. Crime is prevented for the benefit of the entire community. Cases are brought by the community, not on behalf of individual victims. So what did we find? Well, it was pretty bad. In short, victims of crime were being pretty badly let down. Between July 13 and July 2014, over 800,000 crimes reported to the police went unrecorded. That is an under-recording rate of 19%. In general terms, that's 1 crime in 5 reported to the police did not make it onto the books. Now that's an average figure, it's a national average figure. Some forces were far, far better than that. West Midlands Police had a 97% success rate. Other forces were well below that average. Crime recording was even worse for violent and sexual offences, where the under-recording rate was 33% for violent offences and 26% for sexual offences. Now that failure to record such a significant proportion of reported crime is, I think you'll agree, really wholly unacceptable. So what happened next? Well, fortunately, the story gets better. 2 months after the report was published, the Office for National Statistics reported improvements in national crime recording patterns. They acknowledged that a likely factor behind the changing trend in police recorded crime was the renewed focus on the quality of crime recording in the light of the inspection of forces by HMIC. And we saw some pretty powerful, some pretty significant reactions at local level. Following the inspection, for example, Northumbria Police re-examined 153 dropped cases of rape. They reopened 54 rape investigations, which had originally been categorized as not a crime in the first place, no crime. 5 arrests for rape have been made as a result of this, and 3 people have been charged with a total of 6 sexual offences and 3 rapes. That's 1 force, 1 classification of crime. Victims in these cases would not have had justice if it had not been for that. And let's remember, it's not just a question of the victim didn't get justice, but those perpetrators, if they go on to be convicted, those perpetrators of those crimes may very well have gone on to commit more crimes and create more victims and create more danger for people in the community. So no, we don't have hard power, but I think that's pretty effective soft power because it gets changes made. Now those 2 examples, domestic abuse and the crime data integrity, they have been the result of what we call thematic inspections. We inspect according to a theme. And that focus therefore is on one area, often where we already suspect that something's gone wrong or we know that something has gone wrong. Now they have a very significant use, but there was a time when HMIC did only thematic, almost only thematic inspections into particular problems. I've mentioned crime data recording, domestic abuse, undercover policing, counter-terrorism, serious and organized crime, homicide, road traffic offences, burglary, antisocial behaviour, public disorder. I could go on. We look at the whole range from low-level antisocial behaviour right up to organised crime and terrorism. And they clearly have an important purpose, and we will carry on doing them. But in November last year, we introduced a new way of working. It's our new annual all-force inspection programme. Core policing, every force, every year. The assessment is known as PEAL, which stands for Police Effectiveness, Efficiency and Legitimacy. We assessed all 43 forces in England and Wales against the same criteria, and we will come back again, again, and again, year in, year out, looking at the same things in every force, every year. We will therefore establish a benchmark of data, and we will be able to see whether these forces are improving or going backwards against a number of different assessments on efficiency, effectiveness, and legitimacy. And comparisons will therefore be made by local people, by police and crime commissioners, by the media, by everyone. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And are we better than comparable forces? This is very useful information. It assesses overall how well each force cuts crime, how it assesses whether it how well it provides a service that is fair, and how well that force provides value for money. Is it using its financial resources as efficiently as it might? In the first year of the inspections, we graded most forces as good, on a range: outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. The same 4 categories that Ofsted used for schools. And we will continue to develop our methodology, and graded judgments will be made on all of our assessment questions in the next assessment, which we will publish next February. Now, while last year's results were broadly encouraging, it is clear that there's still a lot to do before the majority of forces will attain the grade of outstanding. All forces should aim to be outstanding. Being good is the minimum grade which the public are entitled to expect, and forces should always try to do better than that. Now, alongside the publication of that assessment, we launched a new website. And whilst we published a large 250-page document on the 27th of November last year, containing the overall assessment of the condition of the police, the website is where the lion's share of the information is to be found. And if you go to the HMIC website, you will be met by a screen which is a map of England and Wales. Click on your police force area and you'll see the overall assessments, and then as you go downwards and downwards, depending on your level of interest, you'll see more and more information and the supporting evidence. Now, on the day we announced it, we had more hits in our website than we had ever had per hour, and since then local media has used it as an Aladdin's cave of data to find out just how well their forces are doing. And they have used it to write newspaper articles on a whole range of policing matters. Now remember, policing is predominantly local, and the local media are the principal means by which local people will find out how their forces are doing. And people in Cumbria are not that interested in how well things are going in Kent, but they are interested in how things are in Cumbria. The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph probably aren't going to say very much about Cumbria, but the local Cumbria papers and the Kent papers, etc., will. So I commend our website to you. Now, the last part of what I'd like to say is to talk about some of the greatest issues that I see facing policing today. And I'm sure it's clear to all of us that policing continue to face change and challenge on an unprecedented scale. The scale can be seen as daunting, but it's not unique to the police. The rest of the public and private sectors are facing equally strong demands for change and for improvement, for accountability, greater efficiency, and better leadership. For the police, this pressure to improve is brought into sharper focus because of the unique powers that they hold, the visible and often dangerous work that they do, and the high degree of scrutiny they receive from the public and from the media. Now, I'd like to talk about just 3 of the major issues. How am I doing for time? Oh, it's all right, isn't it? That I see facing the police service, and I'll give you my thoughts. They should be no great surprise to you, and they are ensuring that the police's capabilities catch up with, and then keep pace with, and ideally get ahead of the changing nature of crime, especially when crimes have a technological aspect. Also improving how the vulnerable are dealt with, especially when their vulnerability is not easily apparent. And then the third one is overcoming the challenges posed by budget reductions, the austerity climate that we're in and we're likely to be in for some time. Now, for too long, the debate on policing is focused on its capacity, numbers of officers, proportions of officers on the front line, the size of the budget. They are important, but so too are the capabilities of forces, what they can do, their skills, their technology, their equipment, the quality of officers, and how well those officers are led. Without constant refreshing and improvement of capabilities to ensure that they match the nature of crimes that are being committed today and the needs of the communities they're serving, then forces will stagnate and their core capabilities will decay. Forces can't ever allow what they do to be materially out of line with what they need to do. And that constant adaptation and improvement must always be by building on current capability and learning from others. Now, almost all crime now has a technological aspect to it, whether that is the means by which the crime is committed, or a source of valuable evidence to trace the offender, mobile phone data, for example, or a source of intelligence to understand the threats. Technological change has brought about a fundamental shift in how some crime is committed. Crimes that the police have dealt with for many years, such as fraud, can now be committed on an industrial scale, at a speed, and by offenders unknown to the victim and maybe thousands of miles away. Now, the investigative techniques and forensic capabilities which are needed to investigate those crimes are wholly different from the way it was done before. And the capability to tackle crimes involving technology should not be the preserve of the specialist officer. Every police officer needs an understanding of it and the capabilities of dealing with cybercrime which they will encounter. As people have moved their communications and their shopping online, they've also done the same with their insults and their threats, their abuse, and they often use social media for these purposes. Police officers need to be trained to understand those methods which are being used and also to make valid distinctions between cases which require police attention and those which don't. In too many respects, the technology which police officers have to work with is, in my view, well behind where it could be. Some of the technologies that police officers have in their hands is frankly primitive, and it would appall the public to know just how far behind police information and communications technology is in many forces and in many respects. Not everywhere, some are excellent, but it's a long way behind where they need to be and where they could be. Now that leads to a wider debate, which I'm not going to get into tonight, about how the police procure technology and what kind of technology an officer has to have in his or her hand. But it is not beyond the capability of the police, and indeed in some forces it is happening now, for a police officer with a handheld device to be able to walk up Acacia Avenue and to know that there's a repeat victim of domestic violence at number 22, a registered sex offender at number 47. That vehicle has been there for 3 days and it hasn't moved and it's not from around here, and so on. You should be able to have in your hand, at the time you need it, quality, reliable information which you need in order to keep people safe and to find offenders who are committing crimes. It is not that difficult. The police have made it unbelievably difficult, largely through hand-wringing and chest-beating about how difficult it is to procure things and how afraid they are to deal with the private sector who they think are going to rob them. Wrong. It can be done, it needs to be done, and we need interoperability. Interoperability not only between police forces, because these operational boundaries need to be dissolved completely, but also between the police and other agencies, not just in the criminal justice sector, but in other public sector agencies, so that the information is in the hands of the officer at the time and to the quality and standard that he or she needs it and where it is needed. The second thing I want to talk about briefly is vulnerability. It's not only one of the significant things that are faced by the police, but also by society more widely. And of course, we saw the report of the events in Oxford earlier this week. The report was published, and that is a matter of very serious public concern, of course. Many, many crimes are unreported. And it is impossible, of course, accurately to measure the size of that problem because you don't know what you don't know. But let's remember the primary purpose of the police is to protect people, to keep them safe, to prevent crime. And therefore it's the responsibility of the police not only to react to complaints and reports of crime, but also actively to look for crime and the circumstances in which crime may be committed, even where, especially where, victims may be especially vulnerable, may be especially afraid or may be actively prevented from seeking help. We have a multicultural society, and cultural sensitivities and traditions deserve and should always be given due respect. But where those traditions and sensitivities operate to imprison vulnerable people behind barriers of fear and behind a threat or a reality of violence, where they are used to facilitate or to intensify crimes which are committed against those people, then those barriers must be broken. They deserve no respect at all. We have one system of criminal justice and criminal procedure in this country, and everyone is entitled to the protection of the police. The police must never forget that. Recent revelations of the scale of child sexual exploitation, whether online or by high-profile individuals or institutions or local communities, they have presented the police with a very complex challenge. What has been seen so far of child sexual exploitation is almost certainly only the tip of an iceberg. So far, the police treatment of this cancerous and repulsive kind of offending has too often been found severely wanting, either through a failure to understand the nature of the problem, an unwillingness to take seriously the complaints of victims, or a fear of dealing with a problem which in some, but by no means all cases, involves perpetrators from particular communities. The police need to learn the lessons from the past and to improve their prevention and detection of those kinds of crimes. They need to recognize and to protect children at risk and treat cases of child sexual exploitation as a strong indicator of an extremely serious and prevalent problem, rather than as isolated incidents to be investigated and then brought to justice. I'm under no illusion about the operational difficulty of investigating child sexual exploitation, but of all cases involving vulnerable victims, I think those involving children deserve the most urgent and assiduous attention. The police response to child sexual exploitation will require strong leadership to overcome cultural and institutional barriers that have hampered the response so far. The third issue I'd like to discuss very briefly is overcoming the challenges posed by austerity. So far, the police have shown good leadership in meeting these unprecedented spending challenges whilst seeking to preserve the quality of the service they provide. Overall, the forces have made savings required of them, £2.5 billion over the 4 years just gone by. But the difficulty that each force has faced has varied widely, depending on the underlying financial resilience of the force and the understanding of its cost base. There is no sign, let's be clear, that in the coming years this will be any easier financially. They've taken out 20%. If, and I stress if, they have to take out another 20%, that is going to be much, much more difficult. The police service is likely to be smaller in the future. It is already smaller than it was. And if it is to be smaller and maintain the quality of service that it provides to the public and improve that service in some of the areas that I've mentioned and in others, then that will require sustained effort and commitment from the leadership of the police. The quality of that leadership at all levels will need to improve considerably if the police is to make a proper response to the challenges they face in improving capabilities, meeting victims' needs, and becoming ever more efficient and effective. They're going to have to do more with less. They already know that, and they have been doing it, but they need to intensify it. And one way of improving efficiency is through developing a detailed knowledge of demand. As Stephen mentioned at the beginning, I am a former economic regulator. This is the fact, and this isn't just an economic regulation, this applies to all organizations. The police are a safety-critical, monopoly-essential public service. Every organization, especially one with those characteristics, needs to have, if it's going to be properly managed, a sound understanding The resources available, yes, they know what that is. The Police and Crime Commissioner sets their budget. The demands they face, I'll come back to that. And then in relation to the assets which they have, in order to meet those demands with those resources, they need to have a sound understanding of the condition, capacity, capability, serviceability, performance, and security of supply of those assets. And if they don't have that, then they cannot properly manage the business. Now, the assets of the police are quite complex. They're people, the most complex kind of assets of all. And yet, the principles of economic regulation are exactly the same in the ways that I've described: condition, capacity, capability, etc. And yet, how well do the police understand the condition, capacity, capability, serviceability, performance, and security of supply of their assets? Not that well. And how well do they understand demand? In some respects, it's okay. In many other respects, it's not okay. Now, the police, of course, have an institutional fact. This is just the world of policing, is they have to make decisions on imperfect information, imperfect and incomplete information. That's what they do. Another aspect of policing, which is quite almost unique, I would think, is that when they get up in the morning, they expect that a significant proportion of people that they deal with will be lying to them. That's just the way it is. Nevertheless, incomplete information is what they deal with. But the information they have about the condition, etc., of their assets and the demand they face is insufficient. The financial room for maneuver that police officers have, police forces have, is getting tighter all the time. And there are some forces, and we've mentioned Bedfordshire, Lincolnshire, and Gwent, which are finding it ever more difficult, mainly because of the size of those forces, to achieve further efficiencies and to meet the austerity demands of the current time. However, you can only really talk about viability of forces when those forces have reached the maximum practical level of efficiency. And in order to do that, you have to understand demand. The College of Policing is doing a great deal of work in order to model demand. But I have to say, as a relative newcomer to the world of policing, I am pretty startled that so little systematic and sophisticated work on demand modeling has been done by the police. Well, they're doing it now. They're doing it now because they've got to do it now. But it would be better if they'd done it before. Therefore, in ensuring that the police's capabilities to meet the changing nature of crime, ensuring that they can protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that they can overcome the challenges faced by continuing budget reductions, those things are just a handful of the challenges that the police service is facing now. They're tough challenges for the service. However, I believe that the vocation of policing, the professionalism and dedication of police officers is, in many, many, many instances, the vast majority of instances, unquestioned and outstanding. What they need are the tools in order to be able to do that job as efficiently and effectively as possible. And it is the purpose and the continuing purpose of HMIC to assist the police through inspection and reporting to find those means of being ever more efficient and ever more effective so that they can serve the public in the way that the public both deserve and need. So that's all I want to say. I've overrun my allotted half an hour by a long way, but I'm very happy to take any questions or observations or objections that there may be.